back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys, so I'm here today to do a video SFF reading tips for beginners. This is part of the BooktubeSFF Babbles, so if you don't know what the Babbles are, then you can go over to the BooktubeSFF Awards Goodreads group and you can find out all of the topics for BooktubeSFF Babbles, which is a kind of collaborative community event that we do whilst the awards are running, and it just means that each week you get a topic. You can join in if you want to, you don't have to, but you can talk about that topic in whatever format works for you, so be that video, Twitter, Instagram, photos, blogs, whatever works for you, you can do that. And we're really excited about it this year because we've got lots of great topics. So I've already done 2 previous ones for this year's Babbles, and I'll link the Goodreads group down below where you can find out all of the topics if you want to join in. But let's get started this week with my SFF reading tips for beginners. I had to have a think about this because I've been reading SFF for a long time, but one of the things I tend to hear most often from people who are new to the genres is that they are intimidated by the size of the books in the science fiction and fantasy realms, which I totally understand. I will say usually science fiction is a bit shorter than fantasy. Fantasy you can certainly find more chunky books, so possibly if you are intimidated by the size you want to go for a sci-fi first. But with that being said, there are plenty of fantasy books that are shorter and are the same size as books you may already be reading. So I would say definitely don't be put off by the size of a book. Just because a book looks really big doesn't mean it's a really difficult, complicated read that's going to take you an awful lot of time. Actually, there are sometimes books that are quite long and chunky, but you can get through in a couple of days because they're really interesting, they'll draw you in, and they'll make you excited. And that for me is the best thing about escaping into a fantasy or science fiction world. It's the idea that you can completely escape, you can completely travel somewhere different, something that is so foreign to what you know, but something that is so exciting and invigorating and magical, mysterious, and basically every good adjective you could think of probably applies somehow to science fiction fantasy. I would say a recommendation is a great starting point. When you're new to a genre, definitely ask people who you already know, whose tastes you admire or think align with your own. What would you recommend as a starting point? I often get people asking on my videos, where would you say is a good start point with science fiction? Where would you say is a good start point with fantasy? And I do have a couple of recommendations that I always give. So the first of those is Brandon Sanderson. And I always recommend starting with The Final Empire, which is the first Mistborn book, because I think it's a really easy read. Personally, this was actually my second Sanderson book, so I started with Elantris, but I still think they're both easy reads and ones that you could pick up without having any prior knowledge of the fantasy genre as a whole or anything like that. I think Sanderson's books kind of bridge the gap between YA and adult because they definitely have that fast pacing that YA reads often have. They certainly feel like they draw you in, they keep you captivated, and there's a lot of action and magic on the page in front of you, so you're always reading about something new and innovative and something you probably haven't seen before, so I definitely recommend him. However, there's a lot of other things that you could go for in fantasy. You may want to go for something that you already know. For example, you could go for Game of Thrones, as you can see here, because you've already watched the TV show, you're already familiar with the world, and that means it won't be quite as overwhelming diving into something quite as complex as Game of Thrones. Or you could go for something that is a bit lighter, maybe something that counts as a sword and sorcery, or maybe something that counts as a fantasy of manners. So for fantasy of manners, I'd recommend this one, which is Natural History of Dragons, and for sword and sorcery, I would recommend Lies of Locke Lamora, or possibly Michael J. Sullivan, because I think both of them work really well for that. Those I would definitely count as lighter fantasy reads, something that's quite quick, something that's quite light on the world building, but definitely has great characters, it will draw you in, it will make you excited. In terms of science fiction is a genre that I actually found quite scary when I first got into it, so I can definitely understand people's hesitation when they think they're not going to be clever enough for science fiction. Sometimes science fiction books are really complicated and you definitely do have to have some sort of knowledge of science to get them. However, that does not mean all of them are, and certainly there are going to be plenty of reads out there that you could read even if you don't have a background in science at all and that you could understand. For example, the one that I would definitely say is a great start point is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline.
This is a book that if you have any knowledge of the 80s or video games will be great, but even if you don't, will probably still be great. This focuses on gaming, it focuses on a light-hearted world, definitely a place where adventure is the key to the story and not the scientific terms that you often come across in harder science fiction. This I would class as a lighter sci-fi. I would also say things like Ender's Game would count in this same genre, and also The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is just a great science fiction read that I always recommend to anyone who asks me because it is so good. Personally, I have found over my time of reading science fiction that if you do find a book really complicated and difficult and you're trying to get through it and you're struggling with it, possibly it's just not the book for you, and there will be others out there that will be more to your taste in the sci-fi genre. However, if you are interested in a harder science fiction, some recommendations I would give would be Neil Stephenson, he definitely does that, and there's quite a lot of others out there right now as well, so certainly ones you can find on your own. My final tip would be, if you're not enjoying something, put it down. Don't feel like you have to finish a book because you've started it. That is the worst thing you can do to yourself, because you are stopping yourself from enjoying whatever else there is that you have on your shelves or that you can get from the library or wherever you get your books. I don't see the point anymore of keeping on with something that's just really not my cup of tea, and I've decided this year and even last year that I'm just going to put it down and start something else. And I think when you're entering a new genre, that's definitely the way to be, because it means you give yourself the freedom to enjoy what you want and also not to feel pressure to enjoy things. You don't have to enjoy it. Maybe try things from the library, maybe try things that are borrowed from a friend, rather than spending your own money so that you're not feeling like the pressure to read it because you bought it. That's what I would recommend, and I definitely hope that these tips help you. If you have any other tips for newbies to the genre, then do leave them down below in the comments and let me know some tips you maybe have, or some recommendations for starting out with science fiction and fantasy. I'd love to have your opinions down below. Don't forget, you can always join in with the BooktubeSFF Babbles too. We'd love to have your videos. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.